Welcome to What If, a show which discusses the latest episode of Doctor Who, Series 10, 2017, and what it would be like if it was a classic Who episode. I'm Ben.
I am Luke.
And I'm Nick.
So, what if Knock Knock was a classic Who episode? Firstly, the main villain would be a more generic villain and less of a fleshed out character. It would be more wooden, haha. This, of course, is a bad thing, but it is also a bad thing that New Who appears to have lost generic villainy, besides mentally unstable spouting tumbler-means master.
Yeah, I would say here, New Who now sort of feels like the villain almost has to always be tragic. So here in this particular episode, the villain is very tragic. It would have been more interesting if, I think, in my opinion, had it been, as Luke likes saying, an eldritch horror.
Yeah, okay. Relating further to my idea of the Master, in Classic Who, you have all the relevant background to why the Master is evil. He and the Doctor went their different ways. They had their different ideals. With New Who, it's slammed into his 8-year-old child self.
Well, the Master is made into a tragic figure. In the classic show, he's just the Doctor, but an evil version. He isn't a tragic character. He's just decided to be evil because he likes power, etc. But in New Who, he is forced to become this insane figure.
You have to look to the Pyramids of Mars here, where you have Ibrahim Namin, who is a very generic villain, but then when it has Marcus, you have that Lords, he was my brother. You have that little bit of tragicness, which adds a nice tint to the story. Whereas here, that would be the entire story. It would be, oh, he was my brother.
It's the only motivation. There isn't really. Yeah, it does just become the last 5-10 minutes or so. Just become, but she's my mum or family member, whatever.
Another thing is that the supporting characters would die and stay dead, and the Doctor and Bill would be the only ones left alive. If anything, it might even make a better emotional impact.
Here, it's as though death is like a cold whenever the Doctor's around, because you're basically just going to get better, and it's a...
To the point where it's an actual line in an episode we refuse to admit his existence about.
Oh my god, you're right!
Yeah, I'm sorry, carry on.
Yeah, and the kid, like the teenagers or the students, bemused the reaction after they're released by the house and it's crumbling in front of them. They aren't horrified or shocked or sort of like shaken up visibly. That to me was immersion breaking. Complete suspension of disbelief. They would have been visibly shaken up and whatever, but they just weren't.
Yeah, it's lame. There you go.
I wouldn't say that's tied specifically to Classic Who. That just feels like something of fiction generally that New Who appears not to do for reasons of maybe it wants to be child friendly or it wants to be more magical. Either way, it is a mistake. The third thing would be that there's a less of a reliance on the human heart in Classic Who. And the episode seems to be working backwards, where at the beginning, David Suchet as the landlord seems like this eldritch horror who appears randomly and he uses his tuning fork on the house. He seems like that sort of Lovecraftian demon that Classic Who loves so much. See Sutekh, for example. Whereas here, it turns out that he is a human. The classic show would have had a human who turns out to be Lovecraftian. Perhaps he would have been tied down to the house somehow. It's also very much the power of love which ends up saving the day. And if we look at something like Ghostlight or Enlightenment, it was always the horrors of being that sort of Lovecraftian horror that would end up being their undoing, and it would end up more of a humanity story than this one even was.
So the final point I'd have to say about this particular episode is, in Classic Who, the setting would not involve students on modern day Earth, because Classic Who never tried to be that relatable quotation marks there to, I don't know, young people, it would generally pick a setting that it thought was good for the story. So, Ghostlight, for instance, set in Victorian, the outskirts of Victorian London, let's say, that's a good setting just because a haunted Victorian house has is dripping with atmosphere.
The fact that they're students is, in fact, a result of New Who's desire to be more relatable, in the fact that the Doctor and Companion center themselves around Earth very deliberately nowadays.
That's not even necessarily that's not a New Who thing necessarily. I think that's especially a Moffat thing. Thing is, it's Amy, Clara, and Bill are the first companions to. So it's the Moffat companions that are the first to be implied to be dropped. Well, not implied, but the first to be dropped off during their journeys.
Yeah, the final season of Classic Who and New Who is more Earth-friendly, shall we say, compared to Classic Who, which is more than happy to just be alien planet after alien planet.
In the past, people wanted their sci-fi to be a lot more fantastical. Nowadays, people want their sci-fi to be gritty and realistic. And so, what better way of making it realistic than setting it on modern day Earth? That's just the easiest setting to realize and make it look plausible. Now, it's another thing. A lot of people, when they think of sci-fi now, they want it to look very realistic. When I say realistic, I mean they don't want to see a tatty-looking spaceship set or anything. They want to see something that's really convincing, and that means that costs a lot more than it did back in the 60s or 70s or whatever, when you could make a cheap-looking spaceship set and people wouldn't be that bothered, Hence, to keep costs down, it makes sense to set it in the modern day as well.
That's it. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, watch the main podcast. Next week, what if Oxygen was a Classic Who episode? I've been Ben.
I've been Luke.
And I've been Nick.
Thank you. Goodbye.